anybody out there is looking for vintage drag racing memorabilia, this is the place to be. We're here in Pennsylvania with Mike Goyda in Carson. Thanks you for very much for having us here and letting us look at all your collection of many years. So how did you get started in the collection of the drag racing memorabilia?
It was simple. I bought a hot rod, or a movie poster for the movie Drag Strip Girl, which I'd seen a picture of one of these in a hot rod magazine. They did an article on some guy's collection out in California. And I was looking at these pictures of these posters thinking they got to be $400 or $500 a piece. They just looked that good. And I started calling movie poster dealers and asking them about hot rod movie posters from the 50s and 60s. And they're quoting me prices like $30, $35.
A lot less than you thought.
Yeah, way less than I thought. And I thought, geez, this is like, these are so cheap, I got to buy some of these. So I eventually ended up advertising in a newspaper called Movie Collectors World. And I advertised specifically for hot rod movie posters. And at one time I had probably 500 of them in inventory.
No kidding, 500?
Yeah, because they were just like giving them away. And I framed several and I put them in the garage here. I built this garage in the early 90s. And I had this Buick and I have a 34 Ford Street Rod that was in here. And friends of mine were stopping to see my cars and saw the posters and asked about the posters and whether I could get them any. And I said, sure. And decided that maybe there was a market for this stuff. So I basically walked away from the antique business, which is what I've done all my life, and decided to sell vintage hot rod and drag racing memorabilia. And it worked. It took a long time. It was pretty slim for a long time, but
yeah.
it eventually worked. And then one thing led to another after the movie posters, and I saw a car club jacket and thought that was pretty cool. And guys were telling me the car club jacket should be $50, so I started running national ads saying that I'd pay $200. And the phone started ringing because guys were wanting to sell me their jackets. And then I did that with car club plaques, and it just snowballed.
It just snowballed.
Do
you get into any like speed equipment, like tachometer or stuff like that? Or you pretty much just
only by accident? You know, maybe I buy a collection and there might be something like there are tachometers. There was one that Garnett's name is on it.
Right.
You know, various things like that. But generally, no, I don't do anything with speed equipment because I don't know enough about it, and it's just a good way to get in trouble.
So you just stayed basically
the memorabilia.
Memorabilia only.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was used for a made-for-television movie starring Walter Matthau back in the early 90s, I guess it was. And after the movie, they sold the diner to somebody in California who sold the interior out of it to an antique dealer friend of mine before he moved it out to California. And I just happened to stop at the guy's shop one day out near Pittsburgh, and this was sitting in the window. He actually had 3 complete booths, but I didn't need them all, so
you just got the 2?
I just got this unit.
And where was the diner at in PA?
North side of Pittsburgh.
North side of Pittsburgh. And this is the exact condition that they were
exactly the way it was since the 30s. It turns out this unit was designed by Gilbert Rohde, who was a very famous architect and designer. I didn't know that when I bought it. I found that out later.
It's in great shape for being 1930s original.
Yeah.
And then got a lot of neat stuff here, and I know you got a lot of Jenkins Trophy, his jacket. How did you get that from him? And
I bought all of his stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When was that?
Yeah. Geez, that's been, well, it's got to be at least 10 years ago.
So here you have featured the jacket. So this was Grumpy's jacket.
Oh, there's his name.
Oh my golly.
Now, obviously, as a top 10 jacket, they came this way. He added all the, he added all the patches at the time.
So how did he get that jacket? What did he
Hot
win?
Rod Magazine picked the top 10 drag racers every year from, I think it's 61 was the first year, and 69 was the last year.
What year was that one he won?
You know what? I never asked him that question. It's probably mid-60s.
Okay. How did you get his trophy, the Wally over
Well,
there?
that actually took some doing. I bought all of his shirts and jackets, and various paper handout stuff and things, you know, that were up in his. I was there 3 different times, and the last time I was there, I said there was one thing more I needed, and he said, "What?" And I said, "I need one of your Wallies." And he went, "Oh." I said, "Well, Bill, I have like a shrine to you in my garage, and I really need one of those Wallies." So he hit me with a price that was ludicrous at the time. And I said, "Okay."
I'll take it.
And he says, "Well, depends which one you want." Now, what I chose, I knew what I wanted. I picked his Wally from the 1972 World Finals.
Okay.
Because in 72, in order to win the championship, you had to win the World Finals.
Oh, okay. So that was a real special.
I figured that was the key then. You know,
Sure.
without that, there you would not have had a championship that year. So he said, "Okay," and he sold it to me. And then I talked him out of one of the Carcraft trophies. And later on, about several months later, I was at a Pennzoil Motorsports show in Philadelphia, and he was set up across from me signing autographs. And I said, "I'm curious." I said, "What couldn't I have had?"
Yeah.
And actually, now as it turned out, he wouldn't have sold it to me anyway, but the one I should have been asking for, and didn't even occur to me, was his 1970 Winter Nationals, because that was the first pro stock race there ever was.
The first
which he
pro
won.
stock, yeah, in Pomona.
Yes, and he still has that. That one and a trophy, I think it was a 65 Nationals trophy that had some significance to him. Maybe that was the first Nationals he won, I don't know. Those 2 were the ones he told me I couldn't have had.
Well, man, you're awful talkative. Do you want to say something too? You're awful talkative. So you've had a pretty good relationship with, you know, Jenkins, TV Tommy Ivo, Don Garlitz,
Yes.
to kind of acquire.
And you know what? It's just a simple matter of being fair with people. That's all.
Right.
They know they were treated fairly, and most of the things I get from referrals. I mean, Grumpy's referred me to several people since. You know, Tommy has. It just because I treat everybody straight.
Right.
And I'm very open about it, and I tell everybody, go look at my website. You'll see what I asked for. So,
Right. It's no secret.
Right.
Now, the other trophy we've kind of talked about here is the 1965 trophy that Dave Strickler had won. Kind of tell a little bit about that, how you got it, and, you know, kind of verify what it was.
What that was for, in 65 at the first Spring Nationals, they ran a special race called the Match Bash, which was strictly for AFX cars. In effect, that was the very first funny car race. A guy approached me over at the York show and said he had this trophy that Strickler had won. Before I went over to see him, I got a little concerned that this might have been stolen, because Mrs. Strickler still has most of Dave's stuff.
Right.
So I called her, and she said that Dave had been involved with a Boy Scout troop back in the early 70s, and they were having a fundraiser, and he donated that trophy to be raffled off.
Wow.
And that's how it happened. So it was still over in York, and needless to say, there was no doubt in my mind I was going to own it once I found that out.
Absolutely. Especially to have something of his that's a one of, and,
Right.
and to have it here and keep it locally, it's pretty special. And on display here, Mike has some original drag racing trophies and helmets, alongside some very special fender covers that were only given out to the class champions of various drag strips across the country. Now let's take a closer look at some of the unique and special items Mike has here in his display cabinets.
There's store displays that you had to buy, as a store owner, you had to buy a certain number of kits in order to even get the store display. So most of the very small hobby shops wouldn't have had those to begin with. And naturally, they only, back then, these model kits, well, not these particularly, but like the annual model kits and stuff, they usually only had a run of about 6 months, maybe a year at the most. So there'd be no reason to keep the display out. Then they got relegated to the back room and usually destroyed.
So they're probably either destroyed or given away at some point.
Exactly. But they're really, really quite hard to find.
But never in a million years would somebody have guessed that they'd be worth what they are today, let alone being in somebody's display cabinet in the garage.
No, that's for sure.
Now let's take a look at all the other cool items Mike has on display in his cabinet.
Oh, what a night. Late December back in '63. What a very special time for me, as I remember what a night. Oh, what a night. You know, I didn't even know her name, but I was never gonna be the same. What a lady, what a night. Oh, I got a funny feeling when she walked in the room. Hey, as I recall, it ended much too soon. What a night. Hypnotizing, mesmerizing me. She was everything I dreamed she'd be. Sweet surrender, what a night. I felt a rush like a rolling ball of thunder, spinning my head around and taking my body under.
What's the story about this trunk with all the decals?
A friend of mine, actually, that was his trunk as a kid back in the 60s. And he got all those decals and decorated it, and used to be in his bedroom. And he found it up in his attic last year and gave it to me as a present.
On August 29th, 1965, Hayden Prophet set a new record in his 427 Mercury Comet Cyclone at Lions Drag Strip. While the crowd was still roaring, he posed with Jim Head and the Del Reys. This record is very hard to find as there were only 600 produced.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, good afternoon and welcome.
This area of Mike's garage has even more driver shirts and a couple of fire suits. I want to talk specifically about the Shirley Muldowney fire suit. This very suit was used in the 1983 movie Heart Like a Wheel, a movie about Shirley Muldowney's life becoming the first female top fuel drag racer. This fire suit was worn by Shirley and TV Tommy Ivo. Ivo wore the suit while doing the stunt driving for this movie. I also have to point out the two original Dick Landy and Soxon Martin Performance Clinic posters. The factory-endorsed drivers would conduct performance seminars across the country, giving fans the opportunity to see and hear how the pros tuned their cars, as well as help increase sales for the Big Three. Here's a close-up of the wax cans, shoes, and boxes Mike has on display. I can't pass up the opportunity to get a close-up of these trophies, especially this one, right here from York US 30.
No, this is Jungles, which was 69. And this was Garnet's from 64. He had two. He had a 64 and a 67. I did a trade with him
Oh, really?
for stuff that he wanted for the
Museum.
And he says, well, I'd like to have one of those. Which one you want? And I pointed to the 67. He says, oh, he says, you know, that was the year I said, yeah, I know, that's why I wanted it, because that was the year he won, and he shaved his beard at the start.
Oh, that's right.
He says, now you better take the other one. Tommy Iva missed the cut. By the time he ran 150, they weren't giving the jackets out. And the same thing happened at 160. So when he got to 170, the week before, he had run like 169 and change, and he was lamenting to Mickey Thompson that he wasn't going to get a 170 jacket if he didn't get busy. The following Sunday, Mickey Thompson calls him to the starting line and tells this little story to the whole crowd and presents him with an almost 170-mile-an-hour jacket. And then that afternoon, he ran 170, so he did get the 170
He did get it.
jacket. I had 150, 60, 70, 80, and 90 jackets hanging in here. And when I bought Tommy's stuff, I brought this home and I hung it up, and 6 months later, I was out here one day and I thought, you know what? I could replace any one of those jackets sooner or later, but there'll only ever be one of these.
Only
So
one.
I sold all the rest of them off and kept this one.
Cool. This is a starter's flag available in the late 1950s. Drag racing operators could order these if they either owned or worked at a sanctioned NHRA track. These flags are highly desirable as they were given to the class winners in 1964 and 1965. This flag is from Pomona at the Winter Nationals. Here's the other one given away at Indianapolis at the Nationals.
That piece you're photographing?
Yeah.
That hung right in the reception area at the Hearst factory.
No way. What was her name?
Jerry Gilbert. Her husband's name was Ross Gilbert, and he ran several very successful cars over in Europe.
Do you know how she got the title, Miss York US 30?
She was there from the beginning. She worked for Bill Holtz, who owned York US 30. Still does, as a matter of fact.
Here is a close-up of Mike's collection of car club plaques. Car club plaques were a unique way of showing the world which car club you belong to. Some of the plaques even advertised the engine, make and model, and which speed shop the parts came from. These types of plaques started over 70 years ago. Well, thanks so much for your time, and you've got an absolute gorgeous amount of memorabilia, and not only that, but it's displayed very well, and it's all original vintage is what's really, I think, the key to a lot of this. So I guess the next question is, when are you going to retire, and I can come in and buy all your stuff?
You want to buy everything?
We might be able
I'll
to do it
retire
today. Uh-oh,
How
get the
easy?
checkbook. Yeah. Well, that was easy. You're retired.
Here you.
Say hi.
Let's give this a shot. You've been hanging around me for a while now.
Say hi there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, for keeping the memories and vintage drag racing memorabilia alive for guys like me to see, hear, and occasionally purchase. And don't forget to check out Mike's website at goyda.com as his inventory just keeps getting better.